Good Monday morning, and thanks for listening to my musing today, which is about sainthood. I am not a saint. At least I don't think so. Unless we're talking about the ways that saint is used in the New Testament. When Paul is addressing most of his letters, he addresses them to the saints in Corinth or in Philippi or in Galatia or whatever the case may be. Saint is a word not for the especially good Christians, but for all the Christians. So how did we come to imagine that saints are the people with the halos around their head, the especially good people who at one time, according to the Catholic Church, needed to have 4 posthumous healings attributed to them? I've never healed 4 people after my death, so I guess maybe I'm not a saint. How do we come to understand how that word matters not just to the spiritual elite, but to all of us? Is there a way of thinking that because each and every person has the capacity to be a saint, that changes the way we listen to them, it changes the way that we treat them? I think that's what Paul had in mind, and some of the early church fathers had in mind when they considered saint to be the name that we would use primarily for a believer or for a Christian. There's also an underside to sainthood, that if we associate saint with holy, with righteous, we get the ideas of people who are holier than thou or self-righteous. And even though being a saint, being holy, being righteous, from a pastor's perspective are good things, they come across as negative in normal conversation. Even as a pastor, I don't want to be holier than thou or self-righteous. So how are we supposed to make sense of this religious jargon? How is it helpful to us in the way that we walk our paths of faith? How are they hindrances to how we talk about what it means to be a devout person in the larger landscape where it might seem like some are more devout than others? That's what I've been musing about, and so there is some Greek and some Hebrew, some biblical references, some Catholic history, all of these things that might help us to better understand what comes from the Catholic tradition that I find to be very helpful. A saint is someone who lights our path forward, who provides an example to us for how we might live. So how do we consider those things, and how do we attribute our own kinds of sainthood to the people who've made a real difference in our life, explaining and demonstrating how we walk in love and in grace? That's what I've been musing about, and I would love to say more. So if you can, why don't you stick around? So where does the word saint come from? There are 2 words that are translated in English Bibles as holy. The first one comes from Genesis chapter 2, where God creates and calls the 7th day holy. In Hebrew, that would be Kadesh. And so we get the first notions of what is holy based around the Sabbath, the day that God rested. One day set apart, a special day, a different day from all of the rest. And that's the beginning of what is positive and negative about the ways that we talk about holiness. To be set apart in some ways, by definition, means to be exclusive. It is divided. And whenever we talk about being holier than thou or self-righteous, being exclusive is a part of what makes that negative. But nonetheless, in its original sense, the Sabbath day, the holy day, the day that God rests, is Kadesh, right in Genesis 2. In Greek, the word that we have as holy is hagios, or hagiotsen, which means holy or consecrated. That comes to us from a few different languages. So holy, hagios in Greek, because sanctus in Latin, which becomes saint in French, which becomes saint in English. A saint means it's a noun for what is holy, generally what we take to be an adjective. So a saint is a holy person, someone set apart for holy purposes, and probably you've heard that before. So how do we understand what it means to be a saint, someone set apart, someone called out. The word that we have for church in Greek, ecclesia, means a calling out. Those who have been separated from the world in some parts of the Bible and set in God's hands or within the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, the church. How do we understand those saints? In some sense, it becomes a word for a holy people, and where do we start to see that? In Hebrew in the Old Testament, in Greek in the New Testament. As early as Exodus 20, we start to hear that the Hebrew people are a holy people, a special people, a people set apart. And what marks them as holy? One of the first things that we read in Exodus is that it is their food and the way that they slaughter animals that makes them holy. Because they don't eat bacon cheeseburgers, they are a special holy people. And that leads us to thinking about holiness code, something I think I've mused about before. A special or called out way of living is what marks people as holy. And in that sense, it does not mean good. I think that's one of the most significant things that I've recognized this last week about musing what it means to be a saint. Even though saints are called to justice, even though saints are called to peace and mercy, very rarely do we see in the Bible explicitly that saints are called to be good. And why that matters is that when we make divisions about good people and bad people, we make a separation between saints and sinners, and that distinction doesn't exist in the New Testament. The paradox that we see about those who are called into the church and out of the world is that we are all sinners and we all have the capacity to be called by God for special purposes. So it doesn't mean that Sunday is a better day than the other days, it just means that it's a different day. It's special just because we name it as special. Work is important just as rest is important. Being a saint doesn't mean that God neglects those who are, quote, sinners. Because who did Jesus come for? The sinners. Which, again, means me and you. And because Jesus has come for us, it is God in Christ who makes us holy, holy people. Which is no different than saint. Again, etymologically, those are the exact same word. It is God who consecrates us. It is God who calls us. It is Jesus who makes us righteous due to nothing that we do. And when we recognize that our sainthood is based on nothing that we do, we can recognize that saint and sinner is the same thing. That our actions do not determine whether we are, in that early etymological sense, saints or sinners. We are, in fact, both. But what does that mean for our righteousness, the people who are called righteous? One notable Bible verse says, "There is no one righteous, no, not one." At the same time, we see in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, that Abraham was righteous, and by God's faithfulness, Abraham was made righteous. We hear that Job was a righteous person, and so we don't exactly get away from the distinction between those who do good things and those who are not so good. Think about that in another arena of life. Everyone can be a basketball player, but only some can be Steph Curry. In any arena of life, we see people who seem to excel. And again, within the Catholic tradition, what that means is that a saint is someone who sheds light on a particular way of being. Steph Curry teaches us how to shoot three-pointers. He's someone to emulate in his work ethic and in his precision. For evangelicals, there is perhaps no one more saintly than Billy Graham. For mainline progressives, Martin Luther King is a prophetic voice who shows us a certain way of being. As a Presbyterian, when I think of Presbyterian saints, no one shines more brightly than Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, who shows us a calm and sensible way of being in the world. They each have a little light to shine on how to live a life well. whether that's in success measured in different ways, whether that's in righteousness in different sorts of ways. There are certain people that deserve a special name, even though saint didn't originally mean that, that help us to reach higher than we can, that put a crown above our heads so that we might grow into it. And that brings us to the saintly halo. Halos are not mentioned in the Bible, even though there are a couple of glowing people. We notice that when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, he is radiant after having met God. During the story of the Transfiguration, we see that Jesus is alongside Moses and Elijah, and he's radiant. Early Christian artists, and by early I mean about the 2nd century, start to show who the angels are, show who the holy people are, by drawing halos around them. People in Eastern religions had been doing that even sooner. So in early Hindu depictions of the gods and stuff, we see halos around people for those who have become enlightened or released themselves from the cycle of reincarnation. So however we come to see it, we seem to think that saints lead this radiant life, which is how over time we get the notion that a saint shines light on the ways that we should live. What I hope that you get out of my rambling about Greek and Hebrew and all of that today is that it is worth thinking about who serves as a saint. On the one hand, we should consider how everyone is both sinner and saint, so that in our treatment of other people, we learn to listen because they might have something to teach us, we might have ways to grow, and we treat them with respect and dignity because of that. We regard ourselves as saintly people, people who are called out, who are supposed to live a certain kind of life, and it's up to us to determine how we live that life. Ancient laws about what was kosher have been changed, specifically in the Christian tradition, but even modern Jews would suggest ways that kosher food laws should be changed, that perhaps being vegetarian or vegan provides a more saintly way of being rather than just denying shellfish and pork, so that in their eating they are thoughtful and they are set apart. So what would that mean for us? So saints can mean any and everybody, but we also should take time for the ways, to think about the ways that saint does mean someone who is an exemplar. Who are the people in your life who have shown you what it means to be faithful, to be loving, to be merciful? Those people who have demonstrated Christ to you in a clear way are worthy of emulation. So whether that's in the way they handle money, the way they handle stress, the way they make time for their family, the way they take work seriously, however they have shown some divine light to you, I hope that you're able to collect that light in yourself and to reflect it. Because at the end of the day, what is holy is God, and God's light for how God has called us to live. So where people project that light or reflect that light, your ability to reflect it is right there alongside Jesus. That as we seek to be like Christ in love and in mercy, we are reflecting God's holiness and God's love. And what a wonderful opportunity that the dirty rags and sinners that we might be, somehow God is able to call us holy and to choose us to reflect that divine light. These are some of the things that I've been musing about today. So as you think about whether that term strikes you as something positive or something negative, I'd love to hear about that in emails. For all of you sinners out there, and a reminder, that's all of us, remember that there is a lot of grace being shown on us, so that being a saint and a sinner goes together. You're not cut out, is my point. Rather, you are called in to the mercy and the love of God, and isn't that wonderful? So to all of you, thanks for the ways that you are called to be saints. Thanks for being saintly to me and listening through all of this rambling. I hope you're able to do some musing too. I'll see you next Monday.